What's up, guys? It's Chris. Welcome to VH Agents. Alright, so just off rip, I want to say this is not going to be a super in-depth video. As in, this is not going to be something that's going to be like a step-for-step how-to guide on how to do this. Now, I am going to give you some idea on how to approach this build on things that need to be done, but I didn't chase it all the way down the rabbit hole because I found that sticking my head in the rabbit hole like an ostrich, that I was able to find out the information I wanted to find on this without having to go through every single little bit. So we're going to talk about this a little bit, pros and cons, and what to expect from it, and what to expect off rip going into doing this build if you're going to try and make the attempt. Okay, so I know it seems like I shit on the D series when it comes to a lot of things like NA and all that stuff, and I still kind of do. But I can see the benefit of doing this build NA and even boost for a couple reasons. And but I will say to you this build seems like a fairly labor-intensive build that does not net you a very large return. It seems like the first person that really got into doing this was somebody who was in a specific racing class and was trying to keep up with larger displacement engines that were more powerful. So they were using the advantages they have of being able to use any OEM parts in a single cam to try and net as much gain as they could. Now, it is a little bit impressive, but only a little bit, not super impressive. And the fact that it's labor intensive makes it something that I would not want to do unless you're doing it yourself. Now, if you're doing it yourself, you have the parts, and you ain't gonna pay nobody to do this, then I would say it's an endeavor that's something that I would be willing to consider doing. But here's the thing, right? So you need the rotating assembly from a D17 to do this. You need the D17 pistons, rods, and crankshaft. So the D17, while not a very popular platform and probably something you want to pay a lot of money for, is not so readily available to find used. This is probably something that you would have a better chance of going to a junkyard and finding. Now, I'm pretty sure if you go to a junkyard, I feel pretty confident that these D17s are laying around all over the place relatively untouched. But then you're playing hit or miss on whether you're going to actually find a good one or not, and you're dealing with yanking it out of the car. So that makes it a little bit of a shitty task. It's not like where you can go out to Facebook and millions of people are selling single cams and you can just buy a single cam for a couple $100. The D17 is not something you're going to readily find for resale on the market. So you're facing that. You're facing a little bit of a scarcity on the main components you need. Unless you go to eBay and you're buying a crankshaft there and pistons and rods, which you could actually wind up paying what you would pay if you just went to a junkyard and pulled a long block. The only thing that's shitty about that situation, if you go to a junkyard to pull the long block and you're trying to sell the rest of it, good luck. You know, selling a D17 bare block or a head, yeah, you'll probably just have to wind up throwing that shit in the trash, or being like I do, is hoarding it forever. Okay, so anyway, so I know the most important thing you're going to want to know is gains. What gains you get? Horsepower and torque. Alright, so I saw, I'd say 4 or 5 different builds with different numbers, and each one of them had a different level of, of the build, like what exactly they did to get the numbers they got. Alright, so one of the ones I found was one of the ones that was initially found. It was like, through an article in Super Street that was, I think, used to be Honda Tuning. The results they got from their ZC Stroker D16 was 171 wheel horsepower and 135 foot-pounds torque. Now, 135 is impressive considering the fact that they're rated, those D16s are rated like 108 foot-pounds. But when you talk about 135 foot-pounds versus the B series, which a couple of them make that or close to it, then it's not really that great. Now, what they used for these power numbers was for the weight to make the difference. You're making good B series power, stock B series power, or for with less weight that you're dragging around. So for a track car that's doing circuit racing and shit, Cool, you got the advantage. It turns out the guy eventually gave up doing that build because it was just, it would do good in the long run. It would be competitive in the long run, but like off the line, it wasn't that great. So he was always battling to get back to where he was, or to get back into the competition. I think it's one of those things that when you finally get up to where everybody's at, you're getting lost in the turns again. Anyway, that 171 horsepower, you're maybe thinking, oh, that's fucking great, but that's not, that's not just from doing the stroker setup. They got that number from doing head work as well. They poured it in polished head and cam to cam gears. So that, that kind of sucks. That's a lot of work to do for a little horsepower, and that's why I've always talked about, there's no real money, or you're spending way too much money to go NA for D series unless you have a specific race reason like this guy did. All right, so another one scrolling through, I saw numbers, and I can't remember where it was. I would say the source, but I saw one that was looking at, it was like 148. It was probably on YouTube. I'm pretty sure because I paused the video. Like 148 horsepower and like 140 or 50 foot-pound torque. Honestly, if that was just a straight up stroker kit in a VTEC block, I would be happy with those numbers. Like you just take the D17 rotating assembly, drop it in there. I'd say that's very respectable numbers. It's very, very respectable numbers. You got yourself like a little mini VTEC B20, essentially. So I would be great with that, because you got the torque. It's it's kind of like B20V, LSV. You got the torque on the bottom end, and you got the VTEC up top. So that's an awesome setup. Another one I saw was also, around those numbers, like the 160, 130 kind of shit. Horsepower to torque ratio, and again, with work done to it. And now, okay. So another thing I saw too was people talk about doing P29 pistons with the stroker kit, but the P29 pistons with that D17 crank and rods sticks kind of far out of the block. It sticks way far out of the block. Now, reading on old build threads, it seems that you would have to notch the pistons, modify the pistons to actually get them to clear the valves. Now, that would be a difficult amount of work to do because you're talking about claying the pistons, putting the head on, bolting it on, setting timing, rotating to see how much, see exactly where the pistons are hitting the valves or whatnot, and then making your notches from there, and taking it all apart to breaking it down to make those notches, because that's not something I would want to eyeball. You definitely want to be spot on with that. So that's a lot of work. Now, with that being said, I will say that I saw another guy post like a build. It was a dyno thing, where it's like a 1.5-minute video. He shows it on the dyno, and it shows it's a ZC, and he's got the P29 pistons. Now they're sticking way out of the fucking thing, but I'm looking at the picture and I clearly see no modification done to the dome. There's no kind of witness marks that are any kind of indentations on the pistons valve release to show that there's been any kind of cutting or modification. And then he shows it on the dyno, so essentially if the guy wasn't lying about it, he took the pictures of the engine build, put it together, threw it on the dyno, and it ran. So, but like I said, I didn't chase it down the rabbit hole enough to see that. But I will say that I know that as far as the stroker kit goes, if you're just putting the flat top pistons from the D17, just direct rotating assembly swap over, you don't have to do anything up top to modify the head to get it to work. It works fine. Now, here's the thing where I say it gets labor intensive, and you probably aren't going to want to do this for the amount of money that you're going to have to pay unless you're doing it yourself. And it's the notching. Yes, guys. The one thing that everybody talks about, that hates, everybody likes the Vitara because it's cheap, but nobody likes notching the block. Everybody wants the Speed Factory, no notch rods because of that. So, yeah, longer stroke. You're looking at notching the girdle and notching the block to get it to clear. Personally now, after my recent P2PO build, I got a handle on the notching now where I can eyeball it. I can eyeball a cylinder. I used one piston rod combo to put it in one cylinder, get the idea from that, mark it up real quick, cut that one, and then using that positioning, I was able to eyeball the rest of the cylinders and cut and have a first time go drop in. I'll leave a link for that. I talked about that for like 15 minutes in another video. It's not a walkthrough, but I also have walkthroughs for notching that I will also link as well. So So when you talk about if you're going to notch the block and for this build, then that's the part where I would say it kind of fucking blows to do this, because if you're looking at 140 horsepower, 150 horsepower, and 150 foot-pounds torque, that's very respectable for a D series, but I don't think it's respectable enough for the amount of work and the amount of cost and money you're going to spend on the parts, because essentially you're going to have to buy a D17, you know, to get what you need from that to make this. Now, if you can get one for $350 from a junkyard, that's cool. But then you also got to think about the fact that you got to strip that down, you know, pull it out of the car and strip that engine down to get to the parts, and that kind of sucks. And then of course you got to strip your shit down for your rebuild, notch the block and everything. It's a lot of labor. You need 2 engines to make one, and you got a notch to do it. So that's the drawback. Now me, what I'm gonna do personally, I'm going to keep my fucking eyes open for a D17, guys. That's what I'm going to do. If I see one for sale, I'm going to buy it. And I'm going to do that build. We're going to do that here. And I might even put it in the car for me, personally. Or hopefully, I get along down the line, the VHB engine crew exists at this point, and then I can give it to somebody in my crew. They can run it. I'm very much like to see this. Now, also, another thing, too, is there's another thing that I will point out and note. Now, I think I might even use this for the thumbnail. I'll probably use it for the thumbnail for this. I've seen the picture of the D17 rods next to the D16 rods, and the D17 rods look much beefier. Now, I know it's one of those things that people have talked about before, and I also did a video on before about B18 rods on D16, and it's not worth it for me personally. I don't think it is. Maybe if you don't see that video pop up, check the links in the description, and I maybe will do that. Leave a link to that. But so one thing off rip is it seems like you have B18 size rods that are for the D17. Now I'd actually have to get them in hand to verify that. But being as the fact that came out of from a reputable source, I think there's no confusion there. It was in the article for the write-up, and it showed them side by side. So if that the D17 rod is much bigger than the D16, which makes sense because of the longer stroke, then you have yourself and it's comparable to a B series. Then you have stock rods that now seem capable of doing 300 horsepower. So for you guys that want that, a lot of people say I just want 300 horsepower. There you go. But then again, like I said, to use that, you gotta get the D17 complete rotating assembly. So you're paying what you would normally pay for aftermarket forged rods for the stock rods, and you still got a notch. So it's not that big of a fucking perk. But again, if you're doing your own work and if you happen to come across the parts or whatever, or you get a deal on it, then yeah, again, I think this is something that would be cool. Personally, what I would like to see is that stroker kit with a small turbo, like a GT28 or some shit, man. Throw that on there. You got yourself a snappy, fast, responsive, little engine. And I think I've talked about that before with having like a B20 or a B18 that was just non-VTEC like that, having like that. But I think it'd be the equivalent of a B20V or LSV. I was gonna say it'd be the equivalent of a budget B20V or LSV, but it's not really that much of a budget because you got to buy the whole rotating assembly to make that work, and you're looking at at least $350 for that. But then again, depending on what state you live in, you're paying that much for a VTEC head, for a Doc VTEC head. And if you don't already have a B series swap, then you're paying, for a B series swap. So I guess it could be considered like a budget LSV or B20V, considering the fact that single cam swaps generally go so cheap, and the single cam trainings definitely are cheap. I average pick up my single cam trainings for $50. So yeah. So I think to wrap this up, I will say I will give the D17 stroke or the D16 stroker with D17 setup my seal of approval. I like it enough to say that it's a good setup, and I will definitely be attempting this in the future. So yeah, so that's I guess a big L for a big W for some of you guys because a bunch of people over the past year or so have asked me about it, and I've kind of brushed it off. And while I don't think it's some kind of revolutionary thing that's going to get you big power like some of you guys may have been hoping for, but I do think that it benefits you enough, like even in A and boost, that I would definitely like to see what I can get out of it. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I guess I'll hit you guys up sometime in the near future. Peace.